The file on Judge Frank Caprio's desk that morning was thin. 1 page, really. A single parking violation, $42, issued 8 months ago outside a community college on the east side of Providence. The kind of ticket that gets lost in a glove compartment, buried under receipts, forgotten by people whose lives move fast and whose margins are thin. It was the smallest case on the docket. The court had allotted 4 minutes for it. Nobody in the gallery was watching the door when Amara Collins walked in, and nobody expected that by the time she walked out, there would not be a dry eye in the room. But that is the thing about ordinary mornings. They have no idea what they are carrying. Amara was 26. She came in wearing her nursing school scrubs, pale blue, slightly faded from washing, her name stitched in white thread above the left pocket. She wore them not because she had come from a shift, but because she had a clinical rotation starting at noon and could not afford to be late, and this was the only window she had. She carried no folder, no binder, no attorney. She carried a small backpack with a zipper that didn't fully close, and she wore the expression of someone who had learned, through long practice, to walk into difficult rooms and hold themselves together through sheer determined dignity. She was alone. She sat down in the front row, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. She had no idea that the judge had already read her file 3 times. If you are watching this, and you already feel something swelling in your chest before the story has even truly begun, good. You should. Leave a comment right now telling me you're here, because what is about to happen in this courtroom is the reason some of us still believe that justice can be more than a transaction. And if that's the kind of story you need today, subscribe, because Amara Collins came in owing $42 and left with something that money cannot calculate. Judge Caprio called her case at 10:47. She stood, introduced herself quietly, and explained in the careful, composed voice of someone who has rehearsed being taken seriously because she has had to, that she had received the ticket while attending an evening class. The meter had expired by 11 minutes. She had intended to pay it. Then her mother had gotten sick. Then her hours at the hospital laundry facility where she worked nights had been cut. Then the notice had become a summons, and the $42 had become, with late fees, $118, and $118 was currently the difference between her buying her pharmacology textbook and not. The courtroom was quiet in the way it gets when people stop performing attention and start actually paying it. Judge Caprio looked at her over his glasses. "You work nights and attend school?" he asked. Amara nodded. "Nursing school," she said. "2nd year, I finish in May." He asked what shift she worked. She said 11 at night until 6 in the morning, 3 days a week. He asked how she got to school. She said the bus, and then she walked the last half mile because the route didn't go directly. He asked about her mother. Amara's composure held, but just barely. A small tightening around her eyes, quickly smoothed. She said her mother had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes 18 months ago and was managing, thank you, and that she, Amara, was studying nursing in part because of that, because she wanted to understand what her mother was going through, because she wanted to be useful in a specific and permanent way. The woman in the second row of the gallery pressed her knuckle against her lips. That's when everything changed, not with a revelation, not with a document, not with a twist, but with a question so simple it cut straight to the bone. Judge Caprio looked at Amara Collins and asked, "Where were you 5 years ago?" And the room, which had been quiet, became something more than quiet. It became the specific silence of people leaning toward an answer they sense is going to matter. Amara was still for a moment. Then she said evenly, "I was in a bad situation, Your Honor. I made some choices I'm not proud of. I had a record." She said the word with the precision of someone who has made peace with it by looking at it directly. "Minor stuff. Nothing violent. But I was not on a good path." She paused. "I decided I didn't want that to be the whole story." Another pause, smaller. "So I changed it." Nobody in that courtroom made a sound. Not the bailiff, not the clerk, not the 3 people in the back row who had been whispering to each other since the session began. The court reporter was typing, but even the sound of the keys seemed muffled, as if the room itself was conserving noise in order to make space for what Amara Collins had just said. Judge Caprio wrote something on a notepad. He wrote for longer than a fine requires. Then he looked up. "Do you have the support of anyone? A mentor? An advisor? Someone at the school?" Amara said yes. A professor named Dr. Elaine Marsh had written her a recommendation for the nursing program 2 years ago, and had been, she said with a word search pause, the first person who told me I could do this and actually meant it. The judge asked if she had the letter. Amara reached into her backpack through the broken zipper and produced a folded piece of paper, soft at the creases from being carried a long time. She handed it to the clerk. The clerk handed it to the judge. He read it. His expression did not change, but he was quiet for a moment longer than necessary. Then he looked at the gallery, and then he looked at Amara, and he said the line that the court officer would carry home and repeat to his family at dinner that night, the line that would circulate, shared, saved, reshared, for weeks afterward. The people this courtroom should be most proud of are not the ones who never fell. They're the ones who got back up in the dark when nobody was watching and kept going anyway. Amara Collins pressed her lips together very hard. What followed was not a legal proceeding. It was something older and more important. It was a room full of strangers, deciding, collectively and without discussion, to honor something real. Judge Caprio dismissed the fine entirely. He noted for the record that the circumstances of the original citation reflected a person managing an overwhelming set of responsibilities without complaint or excuse, and that the court found no punitive purpose in compounding them. Then he paused, and he did something that was not in the docket, and was not in the procedure manual, and was not something anyone in that room had been expecting. He asked the clerk to bring forward an envelope. The envelope had been prepared that morning before the session because Judge Caprio had read the file 3 times and had made a phone call the previous afternoon to a foundation connected to the court that provided emergency academic support funds for non-traditional students. The envelope contained a check. Not a large check by some measures. By Amara Collins's current measures, it was a semester. It was the pharmacology textbook and 3 others. It was the gap between finishing and not finishing, between May and the rest of her life. She did not open it at the podium. She held it in both hands, and she looked at Judge Caprio, and she said very quietly, "I don't know how to," and he stopped her gently before she could finish. "You already did," he said. "You did it every morning you got on that bus. Every night you went to work instead of going somewhere easier. Every time you chose the harder thing. This is not a gift, Ms. Collins, this is a receipt," Amara Collins cried. She did not try to stop it. The woman in the second row cried. The court officer near the door looked at the ceiling with great concentration. The clerk, a woman who had worked this courtroom for 11 years and had seen everything, later told her colleague she had needed a full minute before she could type again. The gallery did not applaud, because that is not what courtrooms do. But the silence that filled the room after that moment was not empty. It was full of something that everyone present felt, but none of them could have named precisely, that specific emotion that arrives when the world briefly becomes what you always hoped it could be. Amara Collins graduated the following May. She passed her nursing boards on the first attempt. She accepted a position in the cardiac care unit at the same hospital whose laundry facility she had worked in 3 nights a week for 4 years. Dr. Elaine Marsh attended the graduation ceremony. Amara's mother, whose diabetes she now monitored with the precise and loving attention of someone who became a nurse for a reason, sat in the front row in a yellow dress and cried from the moment they called her daughter's name until well after she had crossed the stage. The $42 parking ticket became the luckiest thing that ever happened to her. Not because of the fine that was forgiven, because of the room she walked into, and the man behind the bench who had read her file 3 times and decided that what he saw there was not a defendant. It was a person. It was a story still being written. It was proof that the hardest chapters are not always the last ones. Judge Caprio went home that evening the same way he always does, without ceremony, without needing acknowledgement, without requiring the room to tell him he had done something that mattered. He had just read the file. He had just paid attention. He had just refused to let $42 be the loudest thing in a room that contained Amara Collins. If this story found you at the right moment, if it cracked something open in you, if it reminded you why showing up in the dark and keeping going is the bravest thing a person can do, leave a comment below with the word receipt and tell me about someone in your life who deserved this moment. Share this with someone who is in the middle of their hard chapter right now and needs to know it is not the last one. And subscribe, because this courtroom keeps proving, week after week and case after case, that the most powerful thing in any room is not a gavel. It is the decision to see a person fully and to call what you see extraordinary.